The house sat on the edge of the village like a wound no one dared to clean. Its clay walls, once painted in the warm reds and ochres of old royalty, had faded into a dull, lifeless gray. Even in the dry season, the wind never touched it. It passed above, around, or simply vanished before reaching the compound gates. Birds flew over it in silence. Crickets stopped chirping near its walls. No laughter echoed from its windows, no crying, no shouting, nothing. The villagers had a name for it now, the House of No Echo. Children, daring each other during moonless nights, would run up to the gates and knock, only to hear nothing in return, not even the thump of their fists. They would press their ears to the wooden panels, but the house swallowed every sound. Some came away saying they heard breathing, others said they heard nothing at all. Both were frightened. Inside, the quiet was worse. It wasn't the kind of silence that soothed or calmed, it was a heavy, watchful thing, like something waiting. You could scream, and even your own ears would betray you. Every sound felt stolen the moment it was made. Nia moved across the tiled floor on her hands and knees, a damp cloth clutched in her fingers, her thin frame wrapped in a faded wrapper that once belonged to her mother. Her bare feet made no sound. She didn't wear shoes anymore, not since her stepmother told her silence began at the soles. She had not spoken in years. Not a word, not a hum, not even the sound of her own weeping. The silence wrapped around her like a second skin. She had learned, painfully, that her silence was not only expected, it was demanded. Her hair, once thick with beads and childhood joy, now hung limp down her back, unbraided and dull. Her hands were raw from scrubbing. A trail of reddish water followed wherever she cleaned, like a quiet wound bleeding through the floor. She remembered the day the silence began. Or rather, the last day she had ever heard her own voice. The day her father died and the stepmother moved her into the servants' quarters. The first time she spoke up, her lips trembling, voice soft, she was struck so hard she bit her tongue. Blood ran down her chin, and the stepmother whispered, "Your voice is what killed him." From then on, she locked it away. Now, Nia served the household like a ghost that still remembered how to mop. Her stepmother never addressed her by name. The stepchildren called her Mole, or Muzzle. But the village children, who peered through the rusted gates and tossed stones at the house to see if it would react, had given her a different name, the Girl of No Echo. And Nia? She simply existed. Breath held, head bowed. She moved when commanded, ate when permitted, and lived as though her shadow was forbidden from stretching past the doorway. Because in that house, even footsteps feared to speak. They said the silence started the day her father died. But no one heard the scream that broke her. Nia had been 13 the year the widow came into their lives, a woman named Oyinda, with skin like polished stone and a smile that never reached her eyes. The village whispered about her beauty, about how she had returned from across the river with gold rings and 2 children dressed like royalty. But what truly stirred their tongues was how quickly she snared Nia's father, a widowed merchant named Adewale, still mourning the death of his beloved first wife. It happened fast. A few polite visits. A meal shared under the old guava tree. Oyinda's laughter ringing through the compound like bells no one had rung in years. Adewale changed. He began dressing finer, speaking less of his dead wife and more about second chances. Within a month, he announced the marriage. The elders blessed it. The village women brought baskets of gifts. No one asked what Nia thought. At first, Oyinda played the role well, graceful, generous, gently firm. She cooked for Nia, brushed her hair, even told her bedtime stories, though her voice was always too smooth, too careful. But the warmth faded quickly. By the second week, Nia noticed her things were being moved, her comb replaced, her sleeping mat shifted closer to the door. By the third, her father's conversations with her grew shorter, strained. And then, just 4 weeks after the wedding, her father died. They said he fell ill overnight. That he had choked in his sleep. That the spirits had called him. But Nia had heard the argument. She had heard glass shatter, a thud, and then, nothing. The kind of silence that gnaws at your skin. She had run into the main hall barefoot, heart pounding, and saw her father lying on the floor, eyes wide open, staring at a ceiling that would never change again. Oyinda stood nearby, a hand on her hip, her expression unreadable. The next morning, Nia's world changed entirely. Her father's will disappeared. The family account, previously handled by the village elder, was suddenly closed. Oyinda became head of the compound. And Nia, the girl of the house, the merchant's daughter, the bright-eyed child once promised an education in the city, was handed a broom. "You speak, you suffer," Oyinda had said softly that first morning as Nia opened her mouth to cry out to the neighbors. "Your tongue killed your father. You screamed, and he died. Speak again, and the ancestors will take you next." It was a lie. Nia knew it. But when you are a child and grief is a hammer, truth becomes dust. She tried once, days later, to argue. She called out as Oyinda struck her for moving too slowly with the morning water. The word barely left her mouth before she felt a sudden sharp pain. Her tongue, inexplicably, split at the center, a clean slice that bled into her mouth like ink. She couldn't scream. Couldn't breathe. She collapsed. Oyinda stood over her, calm, folding a cloth as if this had all been expected. From then on, Nia stayed silent. Oyinda's children, twins, barely older than Nia, but swollen with arrogance, took to mocking her daily. They wore fine sandals, demanded meals served on carved wooden trays, and spat bones on the floor for her to clean. They named her the echo that never came. Sometimes, they would cup their ears dramatically when she passed by and say, "I thought I heard something. Oh wait, it's just our little ghost." Nia learned to move without flinching, to serve without meeting their eyes. She slept on a woven mat beside the hearth, waking every 2 hours to stoke the fire or prepare yam water. Oyinda's rules changed constantly: greet no guests, speak no names, never look into a mirror after dark. And most importantly, never speak aloud. When the elders came to visit, they brought no questions. They sat under the veranda, accepting cola nuts and palm wine, listening to Oyinda speak of her obedient ward. They smiled when she described Nia's quiet nature, her reverence. They praised the woman for taking in her stepdaughter so kindly. And they left with gifts, yams, oil, fine cloths. But some of them must have known. The silence in that house wasn't normal. It wasn't just the absence of laughter or song. It was a suffocating stillness, something that seemed to press on the skin like humidity that never lifted. One elder once left the house shaking, whispering to his wife, "That place, it eats sound." But he never returned. Over time, Nia became less a child and more a shadow. She stopped dreaming of running through the river grass, stopped wondering what her voice sounded like. She couldn't even remember the rhythm of her father's voice, only the look in his eyes that last night, wide and empty, and the way Oyinda had watched from the shadows. Outside, the village continued. Women gave birth. Men went to market. Songs were sung at night. But behind the rusted gates of the house, a girl swept floors with blistered hands, her mouth sealed in silence, her soul waiting. Because even though the village turned their heads, somewhere deep in the soil beneath that house, something ancient had begun to stir. They timed her chores by the moonrise. The moment the pale silver edge of it touched the rooftop, Nia knew the night had begun, not in the way others spoke of nightfall, but in the way only she understood it now. The house changed when the moon climbed. The walls grew colder. The air thickened, like walking through syrup. In the silence, it grew heavier. Oyinda had declared it a week of purification, whatever that meant in her ever-shifting set of rules. For 7 nights, Nia was to cook the evening meal without salt, scrub the courtyard with boiled palm ash, and haul water from the well at the edge of the compound, the one no one drank from, the one no one approached after dark. When she hesitated, Oyinda didn't scold her. She only smiled and said, "It's not punishment, child. It's tradition." Then she walked away and locked her bedroom door. The first night, Nia lit the fire before the sun had fully set. Her hands moved automatically, slice, stir, boil. There was no talking, no laughter, no echo of her own breath. She finished her work and turned to sweep the front path, and that's when she noticed it. Her broom made no sound. Not the scrape of straw on clay. Not even the thump of her footsteps. The quiet wasn't normal anymore. It felt full. Like someone was pressing their ear against the night and waiting. The second night, the water from the well came up thicker than usual. Not dirty, not muddy, just heavy, like it resisted the gourd. She poured it into the clay pot back in the kitchen and saw it ripple, even though she hadn't touched it. That night, while scrubbing the veranda, she sneezed from the dust. But the sneeze never reached her ears. It was as if the house had swallowed the sound the moment it left her. On the third night, she was kneeling by the doorway, scraping wax from the candle plates, when she heard it, breathing. Not hers. It was low, steady, and just behind her shoulder. She froze. Slowly, without turning, she reached for the small knife she kept hidden in her waist wrapper, a habit she'd learned in silence. But when she turned, there was no one there. Only her shadow, strangely stretched and flickering as if caught between two flames. Her stomach turned. She went back to work, refusing to look behind her again. The fourth night, she moved quickly, desperate to finish early. But when she lit the small lamp in the inner room, the flame didn't flicker, it bent sideways, as if bowing to something that stood at her side. She turned, but again saw nothing. Her heart began to race. She went to the courtyard to breathe, but the silence followed her like a fog. By the fifth night, even her own heartbeat became loud. Thudding in her ears, in her neck, beneath her skin. It wasn't the sound that bothered her, it was that it stood out so clearly against the deadness around her. When she tried to still herself, it only grew louder, like a drum warning of something approaching. She pressed her palms to her chest, thinking it would calm, but she felt no comfort. Just the memory of her father's final look, and the way Oyinda had stood in the shadows. That night, she tried to rest early, curling on the mat beside the fireplace. But before her eyes could close, the door creaked open on its own. Wind should have followed, but there was none. She stayed awake until the rooster crowed. She didn't sleep at all. On the sixth night, her own shadow betrayed her. She turned to grab a cloth and saw that her shadow remained facing forward. It didn't move. Didn't mimic. For a full breath, it lingered behind her. Then, slowly, it caught up, like it had been elsewhere, and only just returned. Her limbs trembled, but she said nothing. Could say nothing. That evening, as she approached the cursed well, a voice rasped from behind the fence. It was old, dry, like crushed leaves in a calabash. She turned and saw the blind neighbor, the one who sat beneath the fig tree every evening, always humming to himself. He hadn't spoken to her in years. But now, he lifted his head in her direction. "Silence listens, child," he said, sightless eyes clouded and distant. "Be careful what you bury in it." Then he turned away, as if he'd never spoken at all. That night, Nia didn't return to the fireplace mat. She sat by the window instead, knees to chest, staring into the moonlight. She watched the shadows of the house shift, not from the wind, not from movement, but from intention. They moved on their own, slow and deliberate, like something unseen was walking the halls. The walls creaked, not from age, but like they were breathing. Oyinda passed by once, pausing at the doorway. "Don't sleep before midnight," she said. "If you do, it will speak too soon." Nia stared at her. The woman didn't elaborate. And now, with one night left, Nia felt it in her bones, the house had changed. It was no longer just haunted by silence. It had become it. Something inside had been fed each night with her labor, with her fear, with her stillness. Something waited. And Nia, bound in shadows and breathless chores, was beginning to understand. This wasn't just a house of no echo. It was a mouth. And it was learning how to speak. On the sixth night, sleep did not come easily, but when it did, it arrived like a shroud, heavy, sudden, and suffocating. Nia's body curled on the mat as always, but her spirit slipped elsewhere. In her dream, she walked barefoot through a forest that seemed to breathe. The trees were tall and black, their branches twisting like fingers into the sky. No moonlight pierced the canopy, but she could still see, not with her eyes, but through some strange awareness that pulsed beneath her skin. The ground was soft and wet. Her feet sank with every step, but there was no pain. Only the sound. Whispers. Thousands of them. Some high-pitched and urgent, others slow and weeping. They didn't speak in any tongue she knew, and yet, she understood. They were not words. They were griefs. Unspoken truths. Warnings. Stories that had never been given voice. As she walked deeper, the trees began to lean toward her, as if listening. One bent low enough for her to see a reflection in the bark, but it wasn't the Nia she knew. This Nia had her hair braided tightly in long, regal strands. Her eyes were glowing faintly gold. Her mouth was sewn shut with fine red thread, like an offering. But the shadow behind her was screaming. It tore at the ground, clawed at the air, its limbs wild and twisting like smoke caught in wind. And though no words came, the scream itself was real. A scream of sorrow, of rage, of memory buried too deep for breath. The stitched mouth Nia reached forward and touched her hand. "You forgot," she said without lips moving. But it remembered. Then the shadow turned, and looked at Nia. She gasped awake. Her heart thundered in her chest. The room was dark, the fire had burned low. Her breathing came fast, uneven. She reached up to wipe the sweat from her face and froze. Her hands were coated in thick, damp earth. Black mud clung beneath her nails, smeared across her wrists and fingers. She looked around. She had not left the house. The doors were shut. Her mat was beneath her. But on the floor nearby, where her hands must have brushed while she slept, strange symbols had been drawn in ash. Circular spirals. Eye-like marks. Patterns that pulsed faintly in the dim firelight. And in the center of one circle, a tiny bone, chicken, maybe, had been placed upright, perfectly balanced. Nia backed away from it slowly, breathing shallow. Outside, the parrot from the neighbor's courtyard squawked loudly, startling her. That bird had never mimicked anything before, only cawed and squawked like every other. But now, it called out clearly, a soft, trembling voice. "Don't speak, your tongue killed him, shhh." It was her voice. Nia slapped a hand over her mouth, shaking. The next morning, the village midwife came to deliver herbs to Oyinda. She was an old woman, hunched and sharp-eyed, her hands always covered in the faint smell of mint and dust. As she passed through the front gate, she paused. Something in the air was different. She turned slowly, her eyes settling on Nia, who stood by the water basin with a towel in her hand. The woman narrowed her gaze. Her voice, when she spoke, was not soft. "You," she said. "Come here." Nia hesitated, unsure whether it was allowed. She looked toward Oyinda's room, but the door remained shut. "Come," the midwife insisted. When Nia approached, the woman leaned close and sniffed the air around her. Then she touched her cheek, just briefly, and frowned. "Your silence," the old woman murmured. "It's not sickness. It's not just grief." She took Nia's hands and examined her fingernails. The mud stains were faint now, but the old woman saw something deeper, not physical. "You dream in places you shouldn't," she whispered. "And you wake with things not meant to be brought back." Nia looked at her, wide-eyed, confused but frightened. The midwife's voice dropped low. "You're tied to something older than this house. Older than your stepmother's poison words. Your tongue didn't kill your father. But the truth? That might have." Before Nia could react, Oyinda's voice snapped from inside. "She's wasting time again." The midwife pressed a dry cola nut into Nia's hand before she left. "Chew it on the 7th night," she whispered. "But only if the house begins to speak." Nia hid the nut in the folds of her wrapper. The rest of the day passed like a shadow. The stepchildren mocked her again, this time tossing flour at her feet and calling her witch broom. Oyinda ignored her entirely. But the house did not. Every corner now seemed to flicker when she passed. The doors breathed. The silence buzzed, like it was trying to say something but couldn't yet find the words. And every time she turned, her shadow lagged, just a heartbeat, just a breath, behind her. That night, as she lay down, she whispered into her own hand. She didn't speak aloud, but she mouthed the words, "I remember now." And behind her, though no wind stirred, the curtains moved. On the seventh night, the air in the compound pressed in like a fist around Nia's chest. The moon had risen sharp and full, casting silver bars across the courtyard floor. But the light did not soften anything, it only made the shadows darker, deeper, more alert. Even the parrot next door was silent. Nia finished sweeping the inner corridor and reached for the clay basin to wash her hands when she heard the latch slide behind her. The sound was slow, deliberate. She turned, too late. Oyinda stood at the threshold of the storage shed, the thick wooden door already half closed. "In there," she said flatly. Nia didn't move. "I said," the stepmother's eyes flared. "Clean the storage room. Now. And don't come out until morning." Nia's hands trembled. She stepped inside. The door closed behind her with a thud that sent dust falling from the rafters. A lock clicked once. Then again. Darkness. Total. No slit in the wall. No moonlight. No lamp. Only the sound of her own breath, fast, shallow, frightened. And then. A voice. Not a whisper. Not an echo. A presence. "Why do you fear the silence you were born from?" It came from all around. Not male, not female. Not old, not young. It was vast, layered, the way thunder might sound if it could hum and weep at once. Nia pressed her back against the wall. Her lips quivered, but she didn't scream. Couldn't. "You were meant to remember." "But she made you forget," the voice said again. "She killed the guardian. She fed us with your silence. And now you stand on the seal." The floor beneath her feet began to warm. Then tremble. She staggered forward, her hands groping for balance, and that's when the memories started to surge. Flashes. Her father kneeling at a small stone altar beneath the house, whispering into a bowl of salt. Her grandmother, wide-eyed, fierce, singing over a bone she wore around her neck. A night she'd forgotten, a red moon, a chant, a warning, "Your voice must never be taken. It holds what sleeps." The silence had never been a curse. It had been a barrier. And her father had been its last keeper. Nia remembered the day he died, not just the moment she found him, but the moment before, the scream. It had not been hers. It had been his. But it was silence before it could escape. Something took it. Swallowed it. And Oyinda had stood nearby, eyes dark, lips moving soundlessly as if in bargain. Nia sank to her knees. Beneath her, the wooden floor cracked. A sharp wind rose, from nowhere, from below. Then came the splitting sound, like a groan through stone and time. The floorboards beneath her buckled, opening like a mouth. Dust erupted upward. A sudden pulse of hot air slammed into her chest. She crawled back, but it was too late. The hole beneath her yawned wide, not empty, but alive. A shrine. Buried beneath the very house she had scrubbed day after day, hidden under years of footsteps and shame. It was carved into the earth itself, walls of red clay and bone, black candles that burned without flame, and at its center, suspended on a bed of thread and roots, lay a preserved tongue. Small. Gray. Still glistening. Nia could barely breathe. Her limbs shook. She knew what it was. Her grandmother's. She remembered her now. Remembered how they said she vanished without a trace. But she hadn't. She had given herself, sealed her tongue in ritual to bind the silence, to contain it. But Oyinda had broken the line. When she killed Nia's father, the last keeper, the seal cracked. And when Nia stopped speaking, the silence fed. "You carry the last voice," the silence said. You were born from truth and tied with thread. You must awaken what was buried. A swirl of ash lifted from the pit. It did not scatter, it formed, circling around her, wrapping her arms, her legs, her throat. It did not choke her. It reminded her. Nia knelt beside the shrine. Her fingers reached toward the tongue. It pulsed, once, as if it sensed her blood. And then it began to glow. Visions rushed into her, women before her, generations of silence keepers, warriors of sound, all sacrificing voice to keep the ancestral silence from devouring the world. The silence was not evil. It was sacred. But once unleashed, it demanded balance. Justice. Now it wanted a name. Oyinda. Nia's eyes blazed. Her mouth opened. And for the first time in 7 years, she tried to speak. A single breath. A single sound. But nothing came. The ash coiled tighter. Her lips burned. Her tongue prickled like it had been dipped in fire. You must speak with what was stolen, the voice urged. She remembered the kola nut, the one the midwife gave her. She dug it out of her wrapper, fingers shaking, and bit into it. Bitterness spread across her tongue like smoke. The shrine erupted with wind. The candles flared. The tongue, her grandmother's, disintegrated into dust and rushed into her mouth. Nia arched back, choking on the storm. And then she screamed. The sound shattered the walls. The storage shed burst open. The lock flew across the courtyard. The house groaned, loudly, violently, as if it were alive and being torn apart from within. The stepchildren screamed from their room. Oyinda ran into the courtyard, clutching her wrapper, her eyes wild. And Nia stood in the center of it all, ash swirling around her, her eyes no longer afraid. Her voice, full, ancient, layered, echoed across the earth. She broke the seal. The ground beneath Oyinda cracked. Roots burst from the earth like snakes, circling her ankles, pulling her toward the center of the compound. She shrieked, but her voice bent, distorted, then silenced completely. Nia pointed a single finger at her. The silence obeyed. The shrine beneath the house opened wider, ready. The tongue had demanded justice. And now, it had begun. The earth trembled beneath the compound like a thing newly awakened. It wasn't a simple shake or passing quake, this was the kind of tremor that lived in bones, that groaned up from the core of the world, shaking the memory of everything ever buried. Dust exploded from cracks in the walls. The shrine beneath the house breathed through the courtyard soil, its pulse rising like a drumbeat long forgotten. Inside, the stepmother stumbled back, clutching at the doorway as if it could save her. But no threshold could keep out what had been summoned. Not now. Then the whispers began. Soft at first. Barely audible. Like wind winding through bamboo. Then louder. Sharper. And they were not random. They were words. Their words. Every insult ever spat from the stepchildren's mouths came back in 100 layered voices, circling the air like angry bees. Stupid thing. She's not real family. Crawl, you ash rat. Each phrase slammed into their ears with increasing force. The boy screamed, covering his face. The girl clutched at her ears, sobbing. But the whispers did not stop. From Oyinda's lips, words poured out unbidden. She opened her mouth to curse the wind, but instead, it was her secrets that came. I poisoned him. I took the gold. She was never meant to live. I made the floor drink her voice. I fed the silence. She staggered, trying to clasp her mouth shut, but her own hands would not obey. Her body convulsed with the effort of resisting the truth, but it flowed from her like blood, word after word, sin after sin, unfiltered, undeniable. No, 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 she rasped, falling to her knees. The two stepchildren bolted for the compound gate. They didn't get far. The boy was the first to fall, yanked backward by his own shadow. It stretched unnaturally, arms longer than they should have been, hands wide like wings of night. It dragged him to the ground with a force that made his head crack against the floor. The girl tried to scream, but no sound left her mouth. Her own shadow wrapped around her waist, then her throat, binding her like a serpent. She choked on nothing, gagged on breath she couldn't take in, clawed at air that didn't move. And Nia? She walked. Slowly, deliberately, bare feet pressing into soil that no longer obeyed her enemies. Each step peeled the compound open. The walls bled echoes. Laughter, once forced. Sobs, once muffled behind doors. The crack of a whip. The slap of skin. The mutter of deals made in the dark. From the cracked bricks came visions. Nia as a little girl, hiding under the staircase with a bowl too heavy for her hands. Her father coughing in the courtyard, clutching his side, while Oyinda stirred a bowl of bitter stew. Coins being buried beneath the floorboards. Letters torn up and burned. A small knife once meant for Nia, hidden under a mattress, never found. Lies dripped from the walls like sap from a cursed tree. And now the village was no longer blind. They had come, drawn by the sound that had broken their fear. Dozens of them, standing outside the gates, too afraid to enter, too horrified to leave. Mothers, fathers, elders, children, they stood in silent witness as the house exposed itself. The old midwife was among them. She has awakened the root, she whispered. The house can no longer lie. Inside, Oyinda convulsed. Her skin began to crack. Not from heat. Not from blade. But from the very force of her unraveling. Her voice was still speaking, a continuous flow of confessions, regrets, hidden cruelties. I made her clean as blood. I broke the seal. I offered her tongue. I offered her tongue. I offered her tongue. Again and again. Her voice began to distort. Her words came slurred, stretched. Her lips trembled like fabric in wind. Her body flickered. She was being unmade. The silence, once still and cold, was now active. It moved in waves. It wasn't emptiness, it was an ancient force demanding equilibrium. For every stolen truth, a balance was required. For every silenced voice, a scream must echo. Nia stood in the center of it all, eyes closed. The wind rose around her, not from the earth, but from the place inside her where she'd once buried her voice. She opened her mouth. And she sang. The sound was cracked at first, raw like a wound exposed to sun. But it grew. It widened. It folded the pain of her childhood into a single melody. Her voice was not beautiful. It was broken. Wounded. Vast. And powerful. The song she sang had no language, only feeling. It rose and fell like morning thunder, like mothers wailing by shallow graves, like daughters humming lullabies to ghosts. It told the story of a girl trapped beneath duty. Of a father who kept sacred oaths. Of a woman who stole silence and tried to bury its rage. It was a song of unburial. As she sang, the wind calmed. The whispers slowed. The roots that had tangled Oyinda's body retreated. The shadows stilled. The house groaned once more, a final breath, then went still. Not lifeless. Balanced. Oyinda collapsed face first into the dirt. Her skin had gone ashy, hollow, as though she'd been drained of substance. She twitched once, then stilled. Her body did not vanish, but it no longer felt present. Like a discarded husk. The stepchildren lay unconscious, their limbs tangled with their own shadows. Not dead. Not yet. But marked. Nia stopped singing. Silence returned, not the kind that haunted, but the kind that listens. She looked around. The compound, now split open with cracks in memory, stood exposed beneath the stars. The villagers at the gate wept quietly. Not for Oyinda. Not even for Nia. But for what they had ignored. The midwife stepped forward and bowed low. She has fulfilled the voice, she whispered. The silence will sleep again. Nia said nothing. Her eyes lifted to the sky, to the moon now directly overhead. She could still feel her grandmother's voice resting just beneath her own. A chorus now, not a single note. A legacy returned. As she turned back toward the shrine, the earth closed behind her. Not erasing. Only sealing. Like a wound that has finally stopped bleeding. The earth beneath Nia's feet had gone still, but the air hummed with something more ancient than wind. Something older than grief. Older even than blood. She stood alone in the courtyard, surrounded by the wreckage of the compound that had once been her prison. The walls had split like cracked shells, and now the house itself groaned beneath its own weight, as though ashamed of everything it had hidden. The once pristine floors, scrubbed clean by her hands for years, now pulsed with truth, every tile a record of cruelty. But Nia wasn't looking at the ground. She was listening. To the thing that waited beneath it. The shrine had not closed fully. It pulsed still, low, soft, like a heartbeat underground. She stepped closer. With each footfall, her own shadow rose taller behind her, not menacing, but reverent. When she reached the cracked opening at the shrine's center, her breath caught in her chest. The tongue, her grandmother's, had dissolved, yes. But something else had begun to form from the ashen root fibers left behind. A coil of light, thick like smoke and gold like honey, rose into the air. It hovered. Then split in two, half winding toward Nia's chest, and the other curling toward her throat. And then, it entered her. Not violently. Not even painfully. Just, wholly. Nia gasped, stumbled, and fell to her knees. Her spine arched, not from pain, but from release. The silence she had carried, the silence that was taught, forced, burned into her with fear, loosened. And her voice returned. Not the child's voice she had before. Not the quivering voice of someone begging to be spared. No. This was her real voice. The one that had been waiting. Growing. Rooting itself into her bones. A voice of stone and storm. Of women who stitched silence shut to keep the world from falling. A voice carried through generations of oath-bound blood. Nia stood, body trembling, eyes wide. And then she spoke. She spoke the name of every sin buried in that house. She named the beatings. She named the poison. She named the lies. She named the moments the world turned away, the elders who ignored, the children who mocked, the hands that didn't help. Each word left her mouth like a drumbeat, and the house cracked again, the foundation groaning, walls splitting like mouths opening to confess. And then the wind changed. Dust spun in the air, dancing in slow spirals. From it, a figure began to form, not entirely flesh, not entirely spirit. A woman cloaked in wind and ash, beads of bone at her throat and a woven cloth tied around her head. Nia's breath caught. "Grandmother," she whispered. The spirit smiled, her lips moving but her words arriving in Nia's chest as warmth. "You remembered." The wind circled them both. The sky darkened for a moment, as if pausing to listen. Her grandmother reached out, placing her palm gently on Nia's throat. Where once silence had been sealed, the blessing now rested, not to mute her, but to shape her. Not to stop the voice, but to guide its power. A final gust of wind swept the courtyard. The spirit began to dissolve, not in grief, but in completion. And then the ground beneath the compound began to shift. The house groaned again, not just from damage, but from judgment. The earth cracked wide. And the entire structure began to sink. Tiles folded inward. Beams fell like broken ribs. Doorways collapsed. The outer walls slid into the pit below like ashamed sentinels. Dust rose high into the air as centuries of silence and cruelty were devoured by the very land it had poisoned. When it was done, there was nothing left of the compound, only a large circle of blackened earth. Nia stood barefoot at the edge of it. She didn't flinch. Didn't cry. Didn't speak. She turned, slowly, and walked away. Behind her, the earth sealed shut, smooth, final, like a scar. The villagers, still gathered outside the gate, fell silent as she passed. No one dared speak. Not even the children. The village elder stepped forward, an old man with sunken eyes and shaking hands. He had known Nia as a child. Had blessed her father's wedding. Had eaten Oyinda's food and praised her discipline. Now he fell to his knees. His forehead touched the soil. He whispered, voice trembling, "Forgive us, keeper of truth. We forgot the bloodline. We forgot the vow." Nia paused. Looked at him. Then up, toward the night sky, where stars had begun to break through the dusk, glittering like the eyes of ancestors peering through the veil. She raised her chin. And spoke aloud for the world to hear. "I am the silence that speaks." The wind caught her voice and carried it far, across rooftops, over hills, through trees. Birds rose from their perches. The parrots began to hum. In every corner of the village, something shifted. Doors opened. Eyes watched. And in the hearts of those who once whispered and did nothing, a seed of reckoning was planted. Nia walked barefoot through the night, her voice no longer buried, no longer bleeding. Not stolen. Not silenced. Only waiting. For the right time to return. They say if you whisper your pain into the wind, she hears it. No one walks past the place without feeling it, the hush that settles, the way the air slows down. Where once stood a house of cruelty and silence, there is now something else. Not just a home. A listening place. They call it the house that hears. It is built from red earth and dark stone, strong but open, no locked doors, no closed shutters. The compound stretches wide, with a low wall overgrown by flowering vines, and a great tree rising in the center. It grew from the rubble of the shrine, from the ash of the grandmother's tongue, from the sealed silence that once choked everything here. No one planted it. It simply rose, as if the earth, at last, had something it needed to say. The tree is tall, its bark lined with symbols no one carved. Some say the roots carry memories. Some say the branches whisper names to the sky. But what all agree on is this: it only blooms when a lie is buried beneath it. And it blooms often. Because the house that hears is not just a shelter. It is a place for truth. Nia lives there, not as a mistress, not as a savior, but as a keeper. A listener. A voice returned to its rightful place. They come to her in the evenings, the women with ash in their hair, the girls with bruises behind their eyes, the ones who forgot what their own voices sound like. They come in twos and threes, barefoot and hesitant, and they sit around the fire beneath the whispering tree. They speak in fragments at first. My uncle. My husband said if I left. I never told anyone but. And Nia listens. She does not interrupt. She does not flinch. She hears. And when they stop, she tells them, you are not alone. The silence heard you, and it brought you here. Sometimes she sings. Not the thunderous song that split her home apart. No, now, her songs are soft. Full of memory, of mourning, of resilience. Her voice carries the weight of generations, of women who gave up everything to protect what could not be spoken. And when she walks, the wind moves with her. It follows her down the village paths. It tugs at cloaks. It hums between trees. Children say the air shifts when she enters a room. That their dreams quiet. That their nightmares pause. Some villagers avoid her still, ashamed of what they once ignored. But others come now, heads bowed, with gifts of yam and oil, placing them at the gate. Not for thanks. For forgiveness. And Nia accepts. Not with pride. With purpose. She teaches the girls to use their voices. She gives them names when they've forgotten their own. She shows them how to scream when they've been taught to whisper. And when the screaming is done, she shows them how to laugh again, not with fear, but with freedom. And always, the tree listens. Its roots stretch wide beneath the compound, deep into the earth. Birds nest in its branches, and tiny red blossoms bloom when truth is spoken. One night, a little girl who had not spoken in months asked Nia, why does the tree bloom when someone tells the truth? Nia smiled, lifting the girl into her lap. Because lies rot in the belly, she said softly. But truth feeds the roots. The fire crackled beside them. Behind the compound walls, other voices rose, telling stories, naming griefs, remembering joys. And in the quiet that followed, the wind passed through the branches and made a sound like breath, like a lullaby too old to have a name. Visitors from other villages began to come, drawn by the stories. Some came for healing. Some came for answers. A few came to see if the legends were real. They left changed. Because in the house that hears, no story vanishes. No cry is swallowed. No secret remains buried for long. And Nia? She has found peace. Not the kind that forgets, but the kind that remembers, and survives anyway. She no longer wears rags. No longer hides her mouth. Her steps are slow, deliberate, full of weight and memory. Her laugh, when it comes, is full and unafraid. She wears beads carved from the wood of the tree, each one a memory, a name, a vow. And when the sun sets, and the girls gather around her, and the night hushes in anticipation, she looks up at the stars and whispers stories into the wind. Stories of a girl who once served in silence. Stories of shadows that screamed. Of a tongue returned. Of a silence that listened. And the wind carries them. Across hills. Over rivers. Into hearts that still ache. Because truth has roots. And so does healing. And when the silence returns, as it always does, it does not come empty. It comes carrying the voice of a girl who learned to speak again. And the world listens.